remarks in Srila Prabhupada's teachings. And of course, it's very important for devotees, but it's also very important from a communications point of view, how we explain or present these controversial remarks to media, public, religious leaders, anyone who might ask us about them. So we know you wrote a very lengthy article in the ICJ, in the last issue of ICJ, ISKCON Communications Journal. We wanted to ask if you could kind of summarize the main points, the main aspects of your article for our audience here today. And obviously in a shorter version than the article, we invite everybody to, all of them to read it. But if you can give us a little bit the gist of that article in the next few minutes, we would be very happy to hear from you.
Okay. The gist of the article is that there is a very strong tendency in ISKCON to understand everything through Prabhupada's teachings, except for one important topic. And that is, in ISKCON, you are not supposed to understand Prabhupada through Prabhupada's teachings. In many parts of ISKCON, if you simply repeat what Prabhupada said or paraphrase what Prabhupada said, that he is infallible when he's speaking about when he's quoting from Shastra or paraphrasing or explaining Shastra. But Prabhupada said when he's speaking on material topics, if you think that he's infallible, that is ludicrous. This is Prabhupada's word. Ludicrous means something so absurd that it's comical. So, and yet, in many places in ISKCON, Prabhupada's teachings on non-shastric things are accepted as true, and this is, according to Prabhupada, comically absurd. Another aspect of this is that the idea that we cannot approach Shastra directly, we can only understand it through Prabhupada. The fact is that is true in one sense and not true in another sense. The sense in which is true is that without hearing from Prabhupada or his representative, we would never have been able to understand Bhagavad Gita, and much less Srimad Bhagavatam. At the same time, once Prabhupada explains what they mean, we have a God-given right, in fact, a Prabhupada-given right, to take what Prabhupada said and then check it against Shastra. Because if we are unable to do that, if we are unable to verify what Prabhupada said in Shastra, or in some cases where Prabhupada's statement may, let's say, be even stronger than what is actually in Shastra, then it leads to an absurdity again. And that is as follows. Let's say, I gave this example. Let's say you're speaking with a disciple of a Mayavadi guru, an impersonalist guru, and that person affirms that actually Krishna is teaching impersonalism in the Gita. And you say, well, no, because obviously Krishna says here and here and here and many other places that he's ultimately a person. And that person responds, you cannot approach the Bhagavad Gita by yourself. You can only approach it through a bona fide guru. And what makes a guru bona fide is the perception of the disciple. We see even in ISKCON, there were, or even people outside of ISKCON, so-called Gaudiya Vaishnavas, who were just made absurd claims like, my guru is the only pure devotee on the planet, things which really you should get like a stupid award for that, because there's no evidence. Prabhupada used to give perceptible empirical evidence. He said that, because I've opened so many temples, because I've, spread the movement, this is an act of God, basically. Now you could say, well, there were gurus in ISKCON after Prabhupada that had preaching success, but then fell down. Yes, but that's the point. They fell down, whereas Prabhupada remained pure his whole life. And so therefore, we could add a additional qualification that if someone powerfully spreads Krishna consciousness and does not fall down, remains strict and pure in Krishna consciousness, that person is highly empowered. In fact, there's a word for it, Shakti Avesh. And so therefore, Prabhupada gave an observable criteria for understanding who was a very advanced devotee. And by that criteria, Prabhupada is obviously a great acharya. And so if you say, though, that we can't approach, even after we've heard from Prabhupada and we understand the Siddhanta, we can't go back and check, for example, Prabhupada's translation of this or that, then you have nothing to say to an impersonalist that says that the Gita is impersonal, and my guru taught me that, and you can't approach the Gita without a guru, and and my guru is pure, and my guru is pure because I say that my guru is pure. So that attitude, that approach to Prabhupada, that whatever Prabhupada said is true, it not only contradicts what Prabhupada himself said, but also it creates a permission to any bogus person to claim to be an enlightened soul. And you can't switch logic. I mean, if you give an argument for Prabhupada, no, he's pure and we know he's pure, and therefore everything he says is true. Why can't an impersonalist use that argument? You can test an argument by seeing whether it applies in many cases. So, for just to give one example, there are many cases where Prabhupada, let's say, will make very strong statements about women, and the actual Sanskrit is not as strong. But then that raises the further question. The further question is, well, but if Prabhupada's a pure devotee, why would he make those statements at all? Whether or not they're in Shastra, why would he say that? And to that, I would say that it is possible to make very strong statements having pure intentions, but perhaps not having sufficient empirical knowledge. For example, if I say that certain groups of people should not fly commercial jets because they're not qualified, that's not a moral statement. It's just, and so you can test that and see, okay, what are my criteria? People, let's say, who have not had enough years of flight experience or who don't pass certain tests. So if Prabhupada says, which when in Prabhupada's time was completely respectable all over the world, that let's say certain groups of people, gender, race, whatever, and of course these things are topics which are extremely dangerous to even approach. I think that's itself is significant, that nowadays, if you even say, let's discuss these things empirically, you're already evil, you're already the devil. In other words, even to seek an empirical or even to attempt an empirical study of these things is evil. So every society has certain views which it holds uncritically.
I mean, like some things are like almost taboo. You can't discuss them.
Absolutely. Like, for example, in the Middle Ages, or even or even during the Renaissance period, if you say, well, let's have a logical discussion on whether Christianity is the best religion or the only religion, I mean, you would be killed for that. So every society puts certain things in a sacred space where even to critically discuss it is evil. I'm not here proposing, racism or sexism. I'm just saying, though, that to say that certain groups are, let's say, have certain superior qualifications to other groups, physical types or human types, we do that always in zoology. If you're talking about non-humans, they're always horses or dogs or other animals, or one group is more intelligent. Like they have these, in America, it's very common. They put these little bumper stickers in their cars saying, like, my child is an honor student at this school. And there's other stickers that say, my border collie is more intelligent than your honor student. And so let's say dogs. Some dogs are much more intelligent than other dogs. There are races among dogs or different groups. And so to say that certain human groups have certain abilities, and whatever they are, and whatever group it is, I'm not even going to go into that because it's irrelevant. But to say that in the human society, certain groups have certain abilities and other groups have other abilities is just to treat the human beings as animals the way all other animals are studied. And so that's not intrinsically a moral issue. However, because of Hitler, because of slavery, because those kinds of views that certain groups are better led to great evils in the world. Therefore, it's almost like preventative morality, that if you say that certain groups, whatever the groups are, I'm not even going to go there, whatever groups are better or have more ability in whatever area, if you even say that, you are opening the doors to horrible things, to genocide, to slavery, to all kinds of horrible things. And therefore, it is too dangerous to even discuss those things empirically. And therefore, even empirical discussions should be forbidden or so heavily stigmatized in society that no one will dare to do it, because whatever the outcome of an empirical study, it will lead to horrible evil in the world. Now, you could say, if it were true that it would lead to horrible evil, then you could say, well, it's justified to make those things strictly taboo. Prabhupada came from a society in which those topics were not taboo. And I think the question of what was Prabhupada's intention is very significant. Because let's say, for example, Prabhupada's statement about women, which I think in many ways are not scientific. But let's say, for example, let's say in a different world, in a different universe, let's say those statements were true. Then would it be immoral to say that it's true? So in other words, the statement is not intrinsically immoral, but it's immoral not intrinsically, but secondarily, because you could say it leads to great evil. And anything that leads to, and so frankly, you could use deontological ethics to justify the statement that we shouldn't talk about those things. Because even Krishna in the Mahabharata says that rejecting act-based ethics, in other words, you shouldn't lie, even if to tell the truth, you cause the death of 1,000 innocent people. So Kant was like that. So in act-based ethics, the morality is located in the act itself, regardless of the consequences. But that's a view that Krishna rejects in Mahabharata. And he says that in considering the morality or immorality of an act, you have to consider the consequences. And Krishna himself gives the example of a sage who was very proud of his vow to always answer any question truthfully. And so there were some killers who were chasing some innocent people to rob and kill them. And they asked the sage, where are they hiding? And the sage knew. He said, yeah, they're hiding over there. I have to speak the truth. And the killers actually did rob and kill those people. And Krishna said, because the sage told the truth, he went to hell. And he actually went to a really bad hell, not even like one of the better hells. And so therefore, if you take Krishna's view of where a complete description of an act if you want to judge its morality, a complete description of the act must include its consequences. And so in that regard, given the horrible consequences of racism and sexism, one could make, I think, a successful argument that those things should not be discussed, or arguments should not be given against that because it's too dangerous to even talk about those things. So that would be the argument in favor of, let's say, by overwhelming social pressure, forbidding the discussion of those topics. Now, Prabhupada, I think it's fair to say, was not aware of Western history. There's no indication that Prabhupada ever in his life read a book about the West, about history. Prabhupada kept up, newspapers. He obviously knew what was going on in the world. And he, voiced views which were very much typical of India. But Prabhupada there's no evidence that he ever made any kind of study of Western history. And so therefore, we have to separate, should those statements by Prabhupada, let's say on race or gender, should those statements be repeated? Should those statements be taken as true within ISKCON? I think the answer is obviously no. If you say, well, those statements prove that Prabhupada did not have pure motives, I don't think you could successfully make that argument. Because if it were a fact, and to me it's not, that, let's say, women have certain limited abilities, then to give women independence would be dangerous for society. So again, I think that my experience with women is that many of them are very, very intelligent, very efficient, very faithful, completely trustworthy, and in many ways equal to men, and in many ways better than men. And science shows that some men are better at some things. So basically, what the science shows is that men and women, for the most part, are equal. And some things men do better, and some things women do better on average. No, not in every case. That's the science. And so obviously, statements by Prabhupada, which don't agree with what I consider to be a valid science, I would take, I think, quoting Prabhupada, it would be a ludicrous, comically absurd to insist that those statements are true. But if Prabhupada says things which are empirically, let's say, not the case, that's very different from saying Prabhupada says things which show malice, which show envy, which show the bodily concept of life. And I defend Prabhupada, no, there is no malice, there is no bodily concept of life. There's simply some facts which are incorrect. It's just like Prabhupada said that, he quoted the Aquarian Gospel, but it's not an ancient text, as Prabhupada thought. So again, there's a powerful distinction between Prabhupada making statements which are immoral and Prabhupada making statements which simply are based on an incorrect set of assumptions. To give one more example, Prabhupada, his attitude toward homosexuality. Sometimes Prabhupada, there was a letter where he just said to one devotee, wrote to him, I'm trying to decide my gender. Prabhupada said, just choose one and chant Hare Krishna. And so it's clear that Prabhupada, he didn't care what the person, choose whatever gender you want, but just start practicing bhakti yoga and stop thinking about your body. On the other hand, Prabhupada, sometimes there's a letter to, what was his name? Lalita Nath, I think, who was a leader in the movement, or sort of many, many, many years ago. And he was married, and then he gave up his wife and decided he was actually gay. And Prabhupada responded very heavily, and Prabhupada treated that decision as if it was sort of just a discretionary thing, like you could be heterosexual, you don't have to be homosexual, but for no necessary reason, you're just choosing that. It's sort of almost like whimsical. And actually that's not true. We certainly know that's not true. Some people don't really have a choice. And also Prabhupada made another statement. He said that, homosexuality is so degraded, it's not even found among the animals. Actually, it is found among the animals. It's found among every known species that sexually reproduces. It's a small minority, but it occurs, and a certain small minority of every species known to us that sexually reproduces, a certain small minority is neurologically homosexual. And so therefore, if what Prabhupada said were true, his conclusion would be correct. But he was drawing conclusions based on incorrect assumptions about the material aspect of it. And so again, I think Prabhupada's, the morality of his statements is based on what is his intention, to the best of his knowledge. Was he speaking the truth? And there was something spiritually and morally at stake in other words, if Prabhupada's assumptions, material assumptions, which turned out to be not true, if those material assumptions were true, could a good and moral person make the statements Prabhupada did in good faith without malicious intent if those assumptions had been true? I think the answer is obviously yes. It's just, to me, it's like saying that people who are not properly qualified shouldn't fly commercial jets or any jets. I think that's not necessarily a malicious statement. It's simply based on certain assumptions, that it's for the general good that certain people not do certain things. But of course, that kind of philosophical discussion is something which practically doesn't go on. because we live in an extremely unphilosophical age in which people basically just go on the street and scream at each other.
You can't, no possibility to discuss the topics in a peaceful, rational, respectful way. It immediately becomes like emotional and attacks, and then you go after personal attacks, and it gets worse and worse and worse, of course.
Although I've found, and even preaching to American college students who are obviously almost all coming from left of center, that if you raise the discussion to a philosophical level, and they actually will listen. So, so I think that's our job. Our job is not simply to parrot, to repeat what materialists are saying. Our job is to be Brahmins, Vaishnava Brahmins, to educate the public and to teach the public to think philosophically, which no one is doing, actually. And so Krishna, even in the Bhagavad Gita, says, Udasina vad asina, that a Vaishnava literally stays above the material conflicts, remains above these things. And so our job is not to support racism, is not to support sexism, but to simply teach people how to think philosophically about it, and therefore to understand that Prabhupada's statements, although shocking, and none of us are going to preach that, still those statements are not evidence that Prabhupada was impure and therefore not qualified to be the founder Acharya of ISKCON.
Plus the example also that he engaged women disciples in many important functions and responsibilities, and devotees of all races in also all kinds of responsibilities and important spiritual functions. So those acts spoke for themselves also.
Yes, whenever Prabhupada found a qualified person, he ignored their race, he ignored their gender. I mean, there are some cases like with Jamuna, I would have put her on the GBC, but yeah, I think we have to have some grasp of history. And what I say to people also is there's absolutely no doubt that in the future centuries, future generations will look back at all what Prabhupada called the great moralists of our age and see all kinds of horrible things that they're doing now. And so it's easy to criticize people of past ages, but these people who are, being sort of like merciless in their critique of Prabhupada or simply irrational, they themselves will be seen as fools in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this contribution for this topic, and thank you. We hope to see you in the next session.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.